To take a life when a life has been lost is revenge, not justice. That's what Desmond Tutu told us. We can have sadness, heartbreak, without hate. We can have fear, because fear and anger makes us vindictive. It makes us unjust. It makes us unfair. And vengeance has no place in a civilized society. Punishment without understanding is not justice. We can give mercy to the very people that deserve it the least. Mercy is not earned. It's not deserved. It is something that is bestowed upon someone. And you give it because it's the right thing to do. Mercy is what makes us civilized. Mercy is what puts an end to violence. Giving mercy to Nikolas will say more about who you are than it will ever say about him. Holding the weight of another person's life in your hand is a tremendous responsibility. I know that. We know that. And upon conclusion of my closing argument, I will pass you that weight, the weight of Nikolas Cruz's life. For the time has now come where you must make a decision, your own individual moral decision about whether Nikolas Cruz should live or die. And you are never, and I say it so many times, I cannot say it enough, you are never required to vote for death. And to make that decision, you must get close. You have to look into the soul of another person. Look at their entire life, not just what they did, but who they are in order to make that decision. And that's what each of you promised that you would do. Every one of you said that you could look past Nikolas's crime and punish the person, not the crime. You said that you wanted to and that you needed to know everything, not just parts of things, not just clips of things, not just a page of a document, but everything in order to make that decision. What we now have that we never had before, what Dr. Jones says that kids like Nikolas so desperately need, is a diagnosis, a proper diagnosis. You now know that Nikolas is mentally ill and has neurodevelopmental disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. And how do you know that? Because we showed you that. We brought the best experts in the country to tell you that based on their evaluations. The beginning often holds the clue to everything that happens. We brought you people in here from his entire life, people that actually knew him, that saw him, that interacted with him, that treated him, that taught him, that medicated him, that counseled him, that loved him. Not just people that were evaluating him when he was facing the death penalty. You have heard records, you have heard testimony, and you have seen records, because we have moved everything in. Because you have a tremendous responsibility. You hold another human being's life in your hands. And we wanted you to have everything, just not parts of it. And let's talk about some of the testimony you heard from defense witnesses. Carolyn Deakins. Well, she certainly, and thankfully, is not the woman that she was in 1998 when she was arrested with Brenda on June 6th. Today, she is a woman who is grateful to be alive because she probably shouldn't be. And in 2020, Carolyn Deacon was living her life in Kentucky, clean and sober, with her children and her grandchildren. She was working, she was helping other addicts, she was paying it back until one day, Miss O'Shea and I knocked on her door. And we asked her to relive the most traumatic and painful part of her life, a part that most of her family didn't even know about. Most of her friends didn't know about, but she had never even heard Nikolas Cruz's name before, and she certainly hadn't heard Brenda Woodard's in 22 years. But she never hesitated, not for 1 second. You get to determine and weigh the credibility of witnesses. And the judge will tell you that one way that you can do that, to determine if you believe what people are saying to you, is whether the evidence is supported by other evidence or by other testimony. Carolyn Deacon is a woman who, for the first time in 24 years, after vowing never to step foot in Broward County again, because it was too painful, there were too many memories, came in here and testified not only before you, but the entire world about how she was a crack-addicted prostitute. Who sold her body to get high. You decide whether or not you believe the things that Carolyn Deacon's told you. And whether or not she's resentful towards Brenda Woodard. Do you know why she came in here and testified? Because everything she said is the truth. And because it was the right thing to do. And in my opening statement, I told you what I believed the evidence would show you. But now we know what the evidence showed you. That Carolyn and Brenda were homeless, drug-addicted alcoholics who walked the streets of US 1. And and Carolyn did tell us this. She told us what they smoked, how much they smoked, what they drank, how much they drank. They filled up those big gulp cups. All the prostitutes did. Remember her telling us that? And although they may not have hung out every day from March until the date of their arrest, we know from Carolyn's testimony that they had the same job and that they worked the same streets. And Miss Deacon actually told you that she would see Brenda on the streets and they would go behind a building and they would do a hit of crack and they would slam a couple beers and then they would go back to work. And as we get closer to the time of that arrest, they were together every single day. And how do we know that? Because the Cruzes were paying for the efficiency that Brenda was living in on that dirty mattress they had pulled inside. Carolyn told you all of the things that they were doing, both knowing that inside Brenda Woodard's belly was that baby. But you see, by that time, Brenda's addiction was so out of control that the drugs and the alcohol were more important to her than the baby that was growing inside of her. And on June 6, 1998, after she had gotten off of work and Brenda had just boosted some steaks, they stopped and got a 12-pack of beer, and they went to the drug dealer and got 5 crack rocks. And Carolyn told you what they were going to do that night. They were fixing to get good and high. And we all know what actually happened. You saw the police report. Dr. Scott was very clear to point out that Brenda had a 0% alcohol. And this isn't evidence, so I don't expect you to strain. But you know what else is interesting on this booking sheet? That 6 months pregnant, Brenda weighed 145 pounds. And when you go back to those adoption records in March, and you look at how much she weighed then, she weighed 140 pounds. What else is interesting that wasn't mentioned when Dr. Scott testified is that the police officer in his report said that he saw Brenda pass the drug dealer the money. And the drug dealer passed Brenda the crack. What else did Dr. Scott not tell us until he was cross-examined by Mrs. Curtis? That there was beer in the car. So they weren't drinking yet. Dr. Scott and the state of Florida actually wants you to believe that these two women who had just purchased 5 crack rocks and a 12-pack of beer were not getting ready to party. And another thing that Dr. Scott didn't tell you on direct examination, because it would be inconsistent with his concern about the amount of alcohol that Brenda drank. 5.5 weeks, maybe 3 beers. But on cross-examination, Mrs. Curtis, showed him adoption record, page 640, that in July, when the social worker was doing the adoption report, she states that she did drink beer during the first 3 months of her pregnancy. Brenda smokes 1 pack of cigarettes daily. You get to decide and evaluate the credibility of all of the witnesses. Not just by what they told you, but about what they didn't tell you. I also want you to know something. We've all been here for a really long time. I don't remember what every single witness said. I'm sure not anybody else does. And I'm probably going to get in a lot of trouble for this. But Miss Bailey has been here the entire time, and she has typed down every single word that every witness has said during this entire trial. So if you have a question about the testimony that you heard or the words that came out of a witness's mouth, you can send a note and you can say, I would like a readback of the testimony of this witness or that witness. This decision is too important for you to guess or rely on your memory. However, I have noticed that we have some very diligent note takers. But I just want you to know that that is available for you.